So we're very pleased to be joined by three amazing speakers today. We're going to be starting with Gagan Mohindra, who was just elected as the MP for South West Hertfordshire in 2019. So thank you very much for joining us today. We're also joined by Mark Bretton, who's the chairman of Hertfordshire LEP and the LEP Network, and Tom Forth, the co-founder and CTO of the datacity.com. They'll all tell you a little bit more about their roles and their experience in this field. But during the course of this event, you guys can ask questions. So use the chat bar to ask your questions, and we will let you know if we're going to come to you, and you will get the chance to ask your question yourselves. So if you aren't familiar with Zoom, the chat bar is at the bottom of the screen. You go down to the bottom of the menu and there's a box that says chat, so you can start posing your questions that way. And Philip Salter, who is the founder of the Entrepreneurship Network, will be fielding those after the initial statements. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass over to Gagan to take us off. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Katrina, and thank you for inviting me on. I think it'd probably be worth just giving a bit of background of who I am. As Katrina correctly pointed out, I got elected as the Member of Parliament of South West Hertfordshire just under 7 months ago in South West Herts. Prior to that, my experience has been in local government. So I became a parish councillor 16 years ago, held that position for 13 years, became a district councillor 14 years ago. Because local elections have been cancelled, I still hold that. And I was a county councillor 3 years ago and still am, again, holding that. My local government positions have varied over the years, mostly around finance and economic development. And part of that ties in with my day job experience. So at university, I spent a couple of years in the city and then joined the family furniture retail business. Expanded that out, did some online ventures, DVD rental business and a gift store, and started doing property as well. Realised in about 2005/6 that property was just easier, so we focused the business on that. That business is still being run by my brothers, but I stepped away about 5.5 years ago to concentrate on my passion for politics. Just in terms of my values, I think every politician has a set of values and it dictates what their views are on policy. I'm a small government free marketeer. I believe that policymakers are there to free up red tape and allow you as individuals to grow and be ambitious. Irrespective of how you voted during the Brexit referendum, my view is that actually it's Great Britain PLC in a global world. COVID has shown that actually you can be a really successful business from your bedroom or office or anywhere, as long as you've got technology to support that. So the move away from bricks and mortar and probably retail on high streets and office space, for me, is a really interesting direction of travel. We are going through an industrial revolution with technology, and how we as entrepreneurs and business people are adapting to that, I think will be interesting to watch. In terms of the public and private sector, I've sat on a LEP before, and I know Mark will cover that, so I won't steal his thunder. But that typically is a conglomeration between the private sector and the public sector. You guys typically know how to run your businesses. It's not for politicians to dictate how you should do it. What's right for you is down to your own personal circumstances. The policymakers are there to create the environment to ensure that you flourish as best as possible. The most important thing that I, as a politician, can be judged on is the impact I can make positively in your life. So we're obviously going through a global pandemic, and Rishi's statement yesterday to the House I thought was really interesting. I'm a supporter of low tax, so his reduction of VAT down to 5% for the hospitality sector, I warmly welcome. And it'll be interesting under the Q&As to see actually what you, as a frontline, think I and others, as policymakers, can do to help better your lives. I'll stop there at the moment.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And yes, to your point about Rishi, Rishi's statements, you know, and quite a drive towards that local economic support. So, you know, the government are definitely looking at this part of the matrix. So thank you very much. Right, we're going to pass over to Mark, who is going to tell us a bit more about the LEP and his experiences and views on this as a result.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to pop up a few slides. What I'd like to do this morning, just give you a brief insight into local enterprise partnerships, how we come together as a group of 38 through the network, and then give you some examples of what we've been doing, particularly focused around inspiring and enabling small and medium businesses, which clearly is, you know, the heartland of British economy. And I'm going to use my own LEP, which is in Hertfordshire, just to give you a bit of a case study on what some of that will look like. And I'm very happy to take questions later and after today as well. So let me just move you on to talk a little bit about LEPs. We were put together, I think, for about 9-10 years ago, an initiative by Michael Heseltine, really very keen to accelerate local growth. I think he got quite frustrated with the pace of growth through local government. In the last 8-9 years, we've been entrusted, as you can see, with something like £18 billion of public money, either from the UK or from Europe. And that has gone into a whole range of projects. So I think a lot of stuff to do with skills and enabling some really quite highly advanced technology and support for businesses, big town centre regeneration, resolving bottlenecks in infrastructure, and trying to create sort of an economy in each of our communities, which really helps inspire and bring the best out of the people that live there. We've also managed to bring, as you can see, a significant amount of private sector investment. And every time there's been an assessment of whether or not an application for local growth fund money has been considered, the ability to encourage the private sector to co-invest is a clear factor. And certainly in the last big growth deal bid that we made in Hertfordshire in 16, we had £7 private for every public pound. So this is a real vote of confidence that the interventions that we're making are relevant for the local economy. We measure ourselves in terms of jobs, homes and skills. And I was very pleased to see in the Prime Minister's statement last week that we've been given 900 million from the Getting Building Fund. And that has now been allocated to all the combined authorities and LEPs. And all of us are going through by this time next week and just finalising what sort of projects we should be concluding on. But they are designed to be, to use that great phrase, shovel ready. So that means that we're going to get from inception to completion within 18 months. So, but we've got a big pipeline, so there's some great opportunities there. Just to give you a quick snapshot view, and Gagan gave us a little bit of an idea to this. You know, we are where the public, private sector, academia, and the third sector all come together in the economy. So we are in LEPs really the bridge between government and business. Every board that we have is led by a business person. I had a 36-year business career. I'm a non-exec, I'm paid for this, but a lot of us do that. We've also got a big number of local councillors included, and that ensures that we have some democratic accountability to the local people, as well as ensuring that all of the business cases that we put forward have got that hard edge assessment that all the projects that we're going to be supporting applicants to provide are going to hit the objectives and that they will contract against the evidence that they provided in order for us to allocate the money. We're not political. We are a not-for-profit organisation, devolution friendly, and as I say, democratically accountable. And we've got one very simple goal, which is to be the sort of constructive disruptors for constructive growth. And I use that very carefully because we want to make sure that the growth is sound and wise, but we tend to take on things which are more difficult than would normally go through the routine circles. And it's all about making sure that there is inclusion. And so we're very heavily involved in the levelling up agenda, as you'll see a bit later on. just to give you a little bit more of a flavour about the network, this is where we come together as a group of 38. It's not a hierarchy, but sometimes it's better and more powerful for us to be seen and understood as a unit. We made some significant pitches into government in the previous budget. We've made a lot of representations during the current crisis, which has resulted in a number of improvements and changes to some of the schemes. We've worked very closely with all of the business representative organisations, whether that's the Chambers, the Federation of Small Businesses, CBI, and all the local government, district and county councils network, because we're all stakeholders in trying to deal with this challenge. And I've pulled together a regionalised board. I sit in what's now called Catalyst South, which is in Hertfordshire. It's a new name for us, but you'll see each of the parts of England, and we're only in England, are well represented, whether that's in the Northern Powerhouse, where there are 11 LEPs, all the way through London, the ARC, bringing together Oxford, Cambridge, Buckinghamshire and New Anglia, right across into the western part of the country. We're very well engaged. I mean, I was on a call with the Prime Minister and Secretary of State, along with a number of business leaders, right after his first unlock speech. I'm involved, as our colleagues, in Simon Clarke's Economic Recovery Working Group. I'm on one of Alok Sharma's task forces. We're getting ministers out for round tables. You know, we've been involved bringing the voice of business to help with some of these workplace guides. And working through our growth hubs, and I'll talk about growth hubs in a minute, we've been very careful to give constructive but also important feedback on all the interventions that have been made to make sure that they're relevant, and that where there have been gaps in schemes that we believe we can find a resolution to fill, we've been doing that. And because we're a group of 38, there are great pockets of best practice. And part of the job of the network is to share that so that we accelerate learning. And we are now very well assessed in terms of our governance, our planning and our delivery. I'll talk a bit about growth hubs. Now, every LEP has a growth hub. Some are contracted, some are in-house, but you can see the scale of engagement that our growth hubs have across England here. So more than 1 million businesses, lots and lots of different business interventions, lots of help and work in starting up businesses, and lots of help, particularly recently, in helping businesses access the many funds and grants that have been available from the government and through local authorities. Because local authorities, by and large, normally collect money from business. They don't tend to give it out. And sometimes they had trouble finding the businesses who are entitled to those grants. And we've helped them quite substantially with that. But the other side of this is providing support, coaching, and particularly when times are difficult, as you know, it can be very lonely being a small business leader. So bringing together groups of people, helping, share knowledge, provide support, give coaching, give guidance, and get access to a number of the funds and a number of the skills that the growth hubs are able to provide. And only last week, we were allocated another 10 million through growth hubs to help boost the visitor economy. We've trebled the amount of money now that's going into growth hubs. I'm expecting to see more. And I think when we digest some of the statements that were made by the Chancellor yesterday, there will be some more things, if not through growth hubs, through some of our skills infrastructure that LEPs will be expected to go through. Now, I will send this presentation over to the team, and you'll see at the bottom there a little link that will allow you to find your local growth hub in England. So if I just conclude, and just to give you a case study, which of course is my own LEP, the one I know best, and I'm not going to talk about the normal run-of-the-mill major programs that we've done in cell and gene therapy, sound center infrastructure, and regeneration. I'm just going to focus on a few things that are relevant to today, because every LEP has put together 3 or 4 different schemes during the crisis, so over 100 schemes across the country to make some interventions, very focused interventions to help our businesses. Now, we know our local economies very well. We did a lot of work in producing our local industrial strategies, which are having to flex for the current crisis, but that means we really know where our businesses are. We have a good understanding of the sectors that we need to help enable, and we've managed to put together a series of interventions and packages, whether it's a crowdfunding scheme, whether there's some support through grants to help business pivot, or whether it's access to groups of consultants who have at the moment very often given their time for nothing, just to say, I really want to help businesses get through the crisis and have somebody to talk to. So we've bolstered up the capacity. I'm being very interested to see how many businesses we've spoken to this year. It was about 900 or 1,000 in 18-19. So when we see the measures now, it's going to be important. We've been on the local resilience frameworks run by the County Council to make sure that we are bringing the voice of business as to what works, and working with all of those business organisations I mentioned before to make sure that we're just going with one voice and making it easy for government to listen and decode what needs to be done. Having got past, and I think we're still going through a degree, the survival phase, we're turning our mind now to, well, where should recovery be? We're doing a lot of work to update those local industrial strategies, bring a focus on sectors. So in my region, that will be life sciences, the visitor economy, technology and so on, but also making sure that the focus isn't just on large companies, because I've got 60-odd thousand businesses in Hertfordshire. And by definition, many of those are very small and they need our support, particularly with things like skills transition and that whole change of the way in which businesses are going to be working, but recognizing not everybody can work from home and needs some support. And there are a couple of quite chunky packages that we launched before the crisis, one around low carbon, because we're very focused on the green elements of inclusive growth, and also helping some of our businesses get past that initial phase so that they really start to grow into scale. So that's where I wanted to stop, just to give you a flavour. There's lots more that we could talk about, but I'll stop screen sharing and pass on. Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much. What an interesting presentation, and it really lays out just how valuable the LEP program is, and what it offers to people. It'd be quite interesting, maybe later on in the presentation, during this session, if you might tell us a little bit maybe about a case study. I think that would be really fascinating, because clearly it's such an amazing organisation. It'd be lovely to know how it sort of impacted individual people. But for the time being, we're going to move on to Tom Forth, who is the co-founder and CTO of the datacity.com, to share his views on this as well. Go ahead, Tom.
Thank you very much. So hello everyone. I will introduce myself for 1 minute. I am the co-founder of the DataCity. We are at the datacity.com. We work with lots and lots of data effectively to write industrial strategies for cities and regions in the UK, France and the Netherlands, but also to help companies choose their new locations and help companies choose where to expand. So we use a lot of data to do that. My interest in data extends to being the head of data at the Open Data Institute Leeds, which is a private organisation, but not for profit. We are sponsored by 20 organisations in the north of England, most of them private sector, but some local councils, Leeds, Bradford, Calderdale, also contribute. And we work to help companies and local government release data so that we can all do better things with it. We think that data is going to be extremely important for economic growth. Obviously, I'm self-interested, running a big company that relies on lots of open data. So you can understand why I'm happy to dedicate some of my time to promoting the release of more and better open data. And I also set up and run a company which is now quite small called Imactivate. We did some interesting image recognition things. I can no longer tell you anything about what we did, as we have an NDA on all the work we did, but let's just say it let me found the next businesses that I ran. So I wanted to talk a little bit in this kind of 5 more minutes about where we are, I think, as a country on local economic growth and the entrepreneurial angle on it, and where I think there are some quick wins, because I do think there are some quick wins for us, which would be great to go for. So some reality on this is to think that the UK's GDP per capita is the lowest in Northern Europe. I think few of us know that. I think we need to be more aware of it, but that is not uniformly a low per performance. The southeast of England is one of the most productive and prosperous regions in Europe. The north of England and the Midlands are among the weakest economies. And one of the reasons why local economic growth is so interesting is that most of the gap to the rest of Europe that we experience in the north of England is private sector gap. So we want to try and develop more business and make up that gap. I wanted to talk a little bit just quickly about the government's COVID-19 response. Basically, the economic response has been pretty slow, pretty poorly communicated, but ultimately pretty good. So once we get there, it's a big ship, the UK government, and it is interestingly by far the biggest central government in Europe. It's one of my favourite facts that, again, a lot of people don't know. UK central government is twice as big as central government in France. We think of France as a big centralised state. It isn't. Central government in the UK is twice as big as in France, 4 times as big as in Germany. And I think that this is actually the root of some of our problems with local economic growth is that local government is really very, very small in this country. So when we're talking about investment in transport infrastructure, that is almost always spent by the Department for Transport, and the decision is taken in Whitehall and Westminster. When we're looking at support for entrepreneurs, we have things like Technation, again, headquarters in London, very limited interaction with the rest of the country. We have things like a new body, which I enjoy having a go at, but the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, who set themselves up a couple of years ago and started talking about regulating technology. I and many others replied to their consultation saying it would be really helpful if you had some presence anywhere near to us. And of course, they were founded and set up in London and have since managed to have 1 in 10 board meetings outside of that city. These kind of things really hold back growth in the country. I think we need to think a little bit more, be more focused on how that happens though. So I wanted to start with some positives about the UK as an entrepreneurial country. We are culturally entrepreneurial. I think we can forget that quite easily. It is reasonably cool for young people in the UK to start a company. It is not very cool for young people in France to start a company. Whether that actually affects the rate at which they do it is less clear, but it's certainly the culture is quite different. And that's due to things, I think, that support local entrepreneurial activity and growth, like that we all know, a fair legal system, a good press, the English language, easy company law. So it is quite quick to start a company here. Low taxes, low cost of employment. I think there are 2 things that we can tend to forget on positives. One is the size of our internal market. So the UK has an extremely uniform market. This is the upside of the downside of being so centralised. We basically have one rule for the whole of England. There's some devolution complexities, but it's nothing like the complexities you'll have in Germany. So where there's different regulations. So that allows companies to grow very quickly to the whole of the UK. And I think another new advantage we have is metro mayors and devolution. These are starting to bear some fruits, I think. So I've looked at the growth plans recently for Wales in high technology and Scotland, and they are really quite well developed because they've had now 5-10 years to develop them. But we also see similar improvements in a lot of the big combined authority regions. Greater Manchester's industrial strategy really is pretty good. We've seen some good ones in and around the South West as well. But these are things that I think have really improved, and we didn't necessarily have them 10 years ago. So what can we fix? Last thing from me. I think we remain, most of our advantage on low tax and low cost of employment gets eaten up by other high costs that we endure. So they're high costs due to poor infrastructure, but they're also high costs due to very high rents. I read an OECD report recently, which actually surprised even me, which was, I think I pay quite low rent in Manchester. And then I found that compared to my competitor cities in Europe, I pay quite high rent. So I might be saving a lot of rent compared to London, but I'm not saving it compared to my competitors. I think the uneven access to infrastructure, to state research and development funding, and to government support is really a big issue. I cannot talk to TechNation and have them listen. So if I'm comparing that to the situation in the Netherlands, where you look at the equivalent of TechNation in the Netherlands, Invest in Holland, or any of their local equivalents, you'll find that there's always about 12 provinces who are working together. If you want to invest in Eindhoven right now, you can find Brainport Eindhoven and get investment advice. And that will be right from the top of central government and really well funded. If you look at France, the equivalent to their TechNation project, which is to boost digital, you will find that every big city has its own chapter of TechNation. It's not just a local thing. So I think that solving that problem, that making sure that we have a smaller central government, so Gagan will be very happy to hear this. I want a much, much smaller central government, hugely smaller. I suspect we may disagree a little bit on where I would put that money. I might not cut taxes as much. I would probably fund local government a lot more, but I think especially at these bigger tiers of local government. So that's combined authorities. And of course, LEPs also operate on bigger geographies, so that they're also above the kind of local authority scale that can be quite small. So I think that's it from me. Those are some ideas we can do. If we get money closer to people, I think we could have a lot more of the advantages that really benefit, especially London and the southeast of England. We could see them everywhere, and I have no doubt that that would generate convergence in our economy.
Tom, fantastic. Thank you so much. And you know, the point about the kind of north-south divide and the resources that are available in the north is really poignant to this, because you know, the current government have said a lot about wanting to level up and invest up north, and there's huge opportunities for entrepreneurship in Manchester and you know, the surrounding areas. And now is a really great time for the country to move in that direction. So it would be really good to find out a bit more about, you know, on a more localized level, I think, again, what you've seen and what you think would make a big difference, which might make more of a difference there than it does somewhere like Hertfordshire. I'm going to just pose a question before we move into audience questions to Gagan and Mark about LEPs, because of course this is an interesting part of this panel, is that you guys work in the same region. How can LEPs and MPs work together, or can MPs use LEPs to support their constituents, support the businesses in their local area better? If you guys talk a bit about that dynamic.
So Mark, if I start, MPs don't normally get involved in LEPs beyond just lobbying government to give LEPs money. The local political accountability is normally the councillors. Mm-hmm. So going back to Tom's point about moving money closer to the people, I think that's probably the correct model. I used to sit on a LEP that covered 3 county councils, and the quantum of money involved meant that actually that size LEP was absolutely the right size body to be dealing with it. Part of it was getting funding from Europe on infrastructure and education and things like that. So I don't think an individual district and borough in my case would have been the right size local government forum to start those conversations and bring that business engagement that was required to ensure that actually it was successful. From my experience of local government, politicians can do so much, but we need entrepreneurs and business people and education and specialists in other fields like third sector to take on the mantle and drive it forward.
Fantastic. Mark?
Yeah, I mean, just a few things here. I think first of all, just on the levelling up agenda, I think we are, you know, LEPs are well distributed across England with different shapes and sizes. So some of them, like Southeast, where Gagan was, it's quite a big LEP, covers 3 big county areas. You go up into Cumbria, much smaller. So they're trying to make them into where they were functional economic areas. So I think that's the first piece. I mean, that's important, because that then brings the business piece and the relevance of that into play. Just think on this levelling up agenda, I think we are very, very collectively sympathetic and understand the importance of empowering parts of the country which have been left behind. But let's not also forget that down in the southwest and in the south, there are still areas of significant deprivation. As Gagan will know, the most deprived area in the United Kingdom is Jaywick Sands in Essex. So as we're doing all of this, there should not be just a diversion of effort. It needs to be a rebalancing of effort, but we need to make sure that the southern engine, which has generated a lot of tax revenue, continues to do that in order to put money into some of these major projects. The money has to come from somewhere. So in terms of supporting local authorities and business, bringing that together, I mean, that is the essence of what sits on a LEP board and all the structures that are around it. If you remember, I said there were 330 business leaders on boards. There are 180 local councillors on boards. So on my board, I have the county council leader, and I have 3 representatives from the 10 districts and boroughs that sit in my county. And this is typical depending on whether you're in a combined authority with a mayor, without a mayor, or whether you're in a unitary or a 2-tier like we are. So that blend of bringing together the local picture is critical, because a lot of the local politicians, and I've got some really smart people working in local government where we are, they bring you that local picture. They're engaged with their local businesses. They know around the corner from their office what's happening in the high street. They know that they've got issues with entrance and exit into an industrial estate where there's a point of infrastructure that needs fixing. So that is a really important part of the unique makeup of what we've got. And we won't want to dispel that. We do not wish to perform as a large national entity. That will completely devalue that local understanding, that local impact of what we're trying to do. So I think just to sort of summarize again, if you go back to what I said at the very beginning, we have been entrusted with a lot of public money. We've also managed to attract a lot of private sector money, and there's a reason for that. It's because the private sector is very engaged and believes in what we are trying to do on the ground for local people. And we only measure ourselves locally. That's where the real impact of this happens. And if we're not providing a decent service or getting the right projects or representing our businesses well enough, then frankly, we're not doing the job that we were set up to do.
Great, thank you. I'll take over here. Thank you, Katrina, but obviously Katrina will kind of sum up, but also help guide the questions that you guys have. So if you have any questions, just add them to the chat, as I say. But first, I thought it would be a good idea to go to Mike Jackson at Tech Nation, because I mean, I think it's, at the very least, it's a good opportunity for you guys to meet, Tom, because I know you both kind of, at least through email, kind of individually. And it'd be just good to find out more about kind of what Tech Nation is doing, and you know, and maybe kind of respond a little bit to Tom, and hopefully kind of follow up with a beer after this to kind of chat about how you guys can work together, because you're both doing some great stuff. Yeah, thanks very much for that. And yeah, we've met before. In fact, in my very first role at Tech Nation was standing in ODI's head office in Leeds and doing a presentation, which we do. In fact, we've just finished a series of 10 presentations across the nations of the nations and English regions, where we've engaged with over 200 industry leaders, lots of representatives of LEPs actually came along, plus about 2,000 entrepreneurs in the tech sector. So engagement is one thing, and doing roundtables is great, but it's not the end result. But the real sea change that I would like to think we have now completed at Tech Nation is moving from a London-centric tech city model, or indeed a tech north model. And I'm based in Bristol, and I was pretty envious of the emphasis on tech north, even though I come from Yorkshire. And now we've got to what we believe is a reflection of the UK tech ecosystem, where over 50% of the companies we're supporting on our national programs, we only run national programs across the whole of the UK, are outside London. And that reflects the balance of tech. Tech is still just under 50% based in London and the wider kind of southeast, but
overall, we've now achieved that balance. The work that we're now moving into, having got our national programs working, which support about 200 tech companies a year, which is a relatively small number, is now supporting the 5,000 scaling tech companies that are distributed across the whole of the UK. And that's the bigger challenge. Those are the companies that the Scale Up Institute has identified as needing peer support, access to capital, and good local advice. And that is still very patchy as you go around the UK. If you're based in Edinburgh, you can get good access to capital. If you're based in Glasgow, you can't. If you're based in Manchester, you can get good local advice and peer groups. But if you're based in Leeds or in Harrogate or in Scarborough, really tricky. So one of the things we're going to be doing is working with local ecosystems to share best practice across the country. So we pick up a lot of really interesting bits of best practice, some great things some local LEPs are doing, particularly as was highlighted in the east of England. There's some really amazing stuff going on there. So highlight that, share it, share some of the good things that's happening in some of the devolved nations. Wales are doing some amazing stuff with access to capital and their kind of Wales Global Angel Network. So we do think that national institutions, and we do proudly call ourselves a national institution, still have a role in democratizing access to scarce resources and sharing best practice. But yeah, love to meet up with Tom virtually, as we are at the moment, and discuss. And genuinely just disappointed to hear that he's tried to engage. And you know, I'm as I say, I'm always available. And Liz Scott, who's my number 2, who's based in Manchester, you know, would always love to have a conversation as well. Or Jem, who you know we all know is our entrepreneur engagement manager based in Harrogate.
Great, this is bringing people together. That's what it's all about. So the first question we have is from Matthew Guest. I don't know if we can go over to him. That's often the preferable way to do it. Ah, great.
Hi there, thanks for that. It's been a really interesting conversation so far. Was particularly taken with the bits around the collaboration and different ways of getting that to work across the country. And I suppose my question is a bit of a follow-on for that. So we work with small and specialist universities and colleges throughout the country. One of the funds that we've been looking forward to finding out more about is when the UK Shared Prosperity Fund comes around, that sort of replacement for regional development and funding from the EU. And how important do you see this sort of policy for enabling the local collaborations and the other work and really enable socio-economic growth and recovery?
Great. Who wants to take that? Should we start with Mark and then Gagan, then Tom, I suppose?
Yeah, so I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see more detail on UK Shared Prosperity Fund. I mean, for us, it's the big follow-on to the local growth funds that we've had. You'd have heard me say earlier that we had apart from the 900 million we had last week, the last big capital settlement we had was in 2016. So you can imagine there is a significant pent-up demand at local, regional and national level from us. So we're very keen to see that. I think one of the things that I'm going to be interested to see is how we take benefit from the significantly increased collaboration that has happened across all the representative organisations, LEPs and local government, because clearly, historically, there's a bit of a competitive tension, particularly for local politicians, where even though they're sat on boards, LEPs have had the money. And I think we've done a much better job of collaborating with this crisis. I wouldn't want to lose that. So I'm very keen to see where this is going. We still haven't seen the detail of it, but bearing in mind that our growth fund horizon finishes in March 21, even with the small addition of the money last week, you know, the whole sort of where the LEPs and their capital fund go next is absolutely a pivot point. So we're very keen to see this through.
Gagan?
Can you hear me? Sorry. So Matthew, thank you for the question. I think the new norm and the reality of the COVID pandemic has meant that a lot of government's plans about ensuring funding is having to evolve very quickly. I was trying to see the figure that Rishi's announcement yesterday entailed for the Treasury, and I think it was 1.7 billion per minute. It was what he was spending while he was on his feet. These are astronomical figures, and we will be having a mature conversation on how we start leveling the books and repaying that down to a more manageable figure. Mark's point and plea about the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is absolutely spot on, because for anyone that's actually knows what a LEP does, they are really quite unique. I don't think there's a similar body that covers both the public, private, education, third sector. So although I appreciate the value of the LEP, I can't guarantee that Treasury has much money left to fork out as much as they may have wanted to, say, 7 months ago. I will continue to fight that corner because I know the value of it.
Yeah, let me drop a bomb in the chat, right? Everybody talks about collaboration as if it's a good thing, and we're all entrepreneurs. Surely we all see the problem with that. I think TechNation does what all UK national bodies try and do, and it tries really hard to do it. And I know lots of people at TechNation. It tries to be a national body that reaches everywhere, that achieves good outcomes for every person in the UK. It's an extremely noble goal. The question is, does that work? So if I could take one example from the COVID-19 response, and just maybe we could all think about it a little bit. In the UK, we tried to get out loans for continuity of small businesses. And we tried with first a national scheme via banks, private banks, and it really didn't work. And we jumped in with these bounce back loans, which were hugely successful once they were put in place. So that's a great example of the UK being a bit slow, but eventually you get to a great place. But maybe we should look at what other countries in Europe did that had the first scheme. It was 2 months before we got something working that just worked. So if you were a French business, you applied to your local development bank in your region. It was all set up. And each region was competing, right? The support for a business in Strasbourg was not the same as the support for a business in Lyon, was not the same for a support for a business in Bordeaux. This idea that we would have good outcomes from collaboration and uniform funding and mechanisms is really quite bizarrely British, right? So if we think that the British system of doing that works really well, let's keep doing it. If we think that it doesn't work very well, and we look at our neighbours and see them doing really quite well on it, maybe we should look at saying, well, we don't want a new national body to look at dispersing business loans. Maybe we want regional tailoring. And if we're going to do that, we will need to shift money from central to local. We will somehow need to say central government needs to be much smaller, local government needs to be much bigger. And what is interesting is what happens to power dynamics when that happens. If you want to set up techleap.nl, which is the Dutch national tech and data and innovation agency, they have to go and be very polite to all the provinces that fund it. Because it isn't from The Hague that's funding that. The provinces have the money. They will decide what they want to join in with and what they don't. So I think that's something that we should all look at, and maybe a bit less collaboration and a bit more working together in a common interest backed by money.
And I think that leads on nicely to a question to Gagan that I kind of had from your opening, which is, I guess, your personal experience of local government. And you mentioned kind of tax cuts as something you believe in, kind of whether more money should be able to be kind of collected and kept at the local level, and kind of how that fits into your philosophy. So quite a broad question of experience and also kind of philosophy, but it'd be good to get your thoughts on that.
So prior to being the Member of Parliament for South West Hertfordshire, I was the finance lead for a large county council with a budget of 2 billion, representing 1.5 million people. And the levers that policymakers have can either be to reduce the amount they spend or make the pie bigger. Now, part of my drive was to push value for money. And that may have meant increasing certain sectors' budgets. So part of what I was responsible at the relevant county council was their commercial property side of things, and how were we going to make sure that we weren't selling the family jewels off for a fraction of their true worth, but also trying to keep those in the public estate. There's no easy answer, but there's a lot of people out there who have some great ideas. So, as I said earlier, policymakers are there to create the environment and let entrepreneurs and businesses flourish and succeed. One taboo that I did really want to remove, though, was also the fear of failure. You look at any successful businessman, they've had a succession of failures, and it just so happens their last business is really successful, and that's what they're known for. Richard Branson, at the age of 17, started his own business. Alan Sugar. There's so many success stories out there that actually all I try to encourage is people to try. And sometimes it's just being in the right place at the right time, similar to what my selection and election was back in November, December to be a member of Parliament. You create your own luck. So I think part of what I'm trying to do is actually give people the confidence to take that risk, but in a way that's not reckless, but managed risk. So let's see how that actually comes out into fruition.
Great. Mark, did you have anything to add to that about kind of more money? And I guess that follows up with the question around, you mentioned that £900 million, and obviously, where do you think that's kind of, what is your sense of where that sort of money is going to be spent? What are kind of LEPs kind of focusing on? Because I'm sure the entrepreneurs and others would kind of appreciate knowing that. I think you're still on mute, Mark.
Yeah, sorry. I think first of all, LEPs are used to working in a competitive environment. In the last growth deal, 1.8 billion was allocated, £8 billion were bid. So we're used to competing for our money. And there is an argument that local government will also give you, that the amount of energy that's going into competing against each other is not necessarily productive. And I think there's a balance that we're going to have to strike here. I take Tom's point very clearly. It's got to be localized, and any of the conversations that we've been having about clear interventions have got to be made and done locally. So if you look at the 900 million that was allocated last week, it's been allocated LEP by LEP, combined authority by combined authority, against a set of bids that we made. Simon Clarke made a speech to the Local Government Association last week, and he trailed a couple of pet projects in each of the different regions. So there will be some interventions for skills, there will be some interventions for technology and infrastructure. There's a good range of things in broadband, for example, trying to address some of the gaps. I've got he was quite interested in something we want to do for Elstree Studios, for the whole sort of creative media sector, which is a great generator of wealth for UK, and it employs a lot of small and medium businesses in the supply chain to it. But at the moment, all of us have gone away to go and refine our project list, ministers' announcements notwithstanding, to say, well, okay, we bid for this, you gave us this, using our assurance frameworks and all the things that we know, that where's the best place to spend the money that we've been allocated. Now, all of that allocation by allocation is public knowledge. Simon Clarke's speech is on the web, so you can pick up where some of those things are region by region, and there were press releases for it all. But I think by the end of next week, we're all required to have finished our assessment with our boards. I've got a board meeting next week to finalise my pitch. This is what we're going to spend the money we've got region by region. But the key thing with all of this was there was the requirement to be shovel ready, and the definition of that, and there were a series of criteria. It's got to be done and finished in 18 months. We don't want something which has got the gestation period of an elephant. We don't want those. And I think what we've got will be some very interesting projects, but that's just the tip of the iceberg, because I know that my colleagues put a dance site more than 900 million collectively on the table. So there's plenty for us to get our teeth into as a nation.
Great. I know my colleague Sam Dimitri has a question. He's just messaged me. So yeah, Sam, over to you. You're on mute at the moment.
Hi. Yeah. So I was just wondering how LEPs can be evaluated, and what kind of first of all, what kind of incentives are there for good LEPs to expand and sort of bad LEPs to either change or withdraw? And second, sort of maybe more just to Tom, is kind of what data do you think LEPs should be publishing, or local government should be publishing in general, that would make these evaluations easier?
Okay, I'll quickly start on that. So the LEPs that I've experienced that start to work well now, and I have to say there is quite a kind of, my experience is in the urban north of England and the Midlands, right? So it is going to be quite different to especially where you've got councils having to work together. But one of the good things about the LEPs is where they align with the combined authority shape. So Greater Manchester has that alignment between the LEP shape and the combined authority shape. The new Leeds City region, or I think we have to call it West Yorkshire Metro Mayor Devolution Deal, that also aligns now with the new shape of the LEP. And that really improves things. My feeling is that it is the elected part, so the combined authority angle, where you're going to be publishing data on the spending. My suggestion for them is just to try and publish as much as they can about what they're bidding into. There is a challenge with that, and this is kind of comes back to the idea of where our competition happens. So I should just say I agree with Mark and many of the local authorities that talk to him that bidding into a central government pot is not competition, right? That's bidding into like the USSR's central spending control, right? It's not competition. Competition is where your LEP and your combined authority can now start charging some taxes and start making some risky investments in what you want to do. So one of the most interesting things, and it took us 5 years to get a very lukewarm agreement on this in West Yorkshire, was there can be a business rates levy similar to what was used to fund Crossrail that we could use to fund local infrastructure. So the largest city in Europe without any mass transit system, if you want to grow West Yorkshire, you need to invest. We know that national government is not going to be the person who does the investment. It hasn't for 30 years. It will not be in the next 15 years. So we know that we need to fund it ourselves in West Yorkshire. Having that in the devolution deal is fantastic. Sadly, I think it requires votes and stuff like this. So it's going to be really, really hard to do. But that's where I think you want to have the competition, and that's where I think the data will become important. If the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, together with the LEP, wants to raise tax in order to invest in infrastructure, it had better publish openly what it wants to achieve from that infrastructure investment.
Great. Mark, I'm sure you have something to add to that.
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking through really. I mean, the competitive bit I've talked about. I think the local relationships are key here. Just losing my thought a bit because I was also reading some of the chat questions at the same time. Can you just reset the question again for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So I suppose, I mean, I get a better question. How to disseminate best practice. So I think that's probably you'd be best placed to answer. There's obviously some LEPs,
and it's all about measurement and so on. So let me just get back to this. First of all, we are annually assessed by Whitehall. So every LEP is assessed on 3 metrics: governance, delivery, and strategic plan. And we have had, and I think it's fair to say, historically we had a very checkered history. If you go back 2 years, there was lots of issues, public accounts reviews, and so on. The last APRs that were done came out just after Christmas. 38 LEPs, 36 were good or better. One is London, which has got some accounting issues around how it measures spend. So that, and one of the measures which I'm quite, as a businessman, I'm quite allergic to is, did you spend the money? I'd rather, did you spend the money and get the outputs that you should have had as a key measure for that. And there's one LEP that's been completely rebuilt up in Lancashire. So I think that's the first thing. I think the other thing that's going to come out of all of this is a much, and I'm keen to get this, is a much clearer set of metrics against which you measure LEPs. Don't measure me on a set of metrics that you issue me in month 10, measure me and talk about in month 9, and then review me in month 11 when the year's not even finished. We wouldn't do this in business. We would set some very clear objectives at the beginning of the year. We'd have some core metrics by which every LEP should be judged, and then you'd have some specific things. Now, I'm sitting on a panel on the 17th, which is for the Industrial Strategy Council to launch their review of local industrial strategies, planning, and so on, and LEPs, and it's got a whole section in there on evaluation and metrics. Now, this is getting much more closer to the nub of the issue. So are we creating the right jobs? Are we empowering people in order to get the right level of businesses started up? Can we see productivity happening in the right parts of the economy that we've targeted and focused on? That's where I think this conversation now needs to go. I think the value of the network, and I mentioned in my earlier pitch, was around sharing a best practice, to your point. So we've invested in some work with the Centre for Public Scrutiny. Every LEP is having a peer review with another LEP. This is how we share best practice around. And then as we start to see where some of those nuggets are coming from, we've built in the last few months an infrastructure beneath us, whether it's for skills, infrastructure, wherever it is, where we've got executives from the LEP teams who are sharing some of these key points. And that then allows us to be much more effective in when we go and talk to ministers. So in 34 minutes, I'm talking to Mims Davis because she wants to talk about some of the announcements that came out yesterday. I've already got, these are the things that we're doing that have a big impact on the world of work.
Right, thank you.
I'm sorry for losing my train, but there were some really interesting questions.
Yeah, no, it is the challenge, I suppose, of moving, having two things going on at once. So no, it's absolutely.
Thanks for getting me back anyway.
That's fine. We'll go to Alison now, who's got a question around kind of backing female founders. So yeah, go for that, Alison.
Oh, hello, thanks for having me. I don't want to be sort of waving just the female flag, if you know what I mean. But it is a real difficult situation when you have a company that's pre-revenue, because we've been in research and development for 22 years, because it's mental health and well-being focused. So obviously COVID-19, we're ready. We're data focused. We want to make measurable outcomes. We can make them to IAP standards, but we just don't fit the model for the standard VC funds. Even the British Bank, they require us to have £2 million turnover, which if you're in mental health development, you can't, you put the people before the profit. It's a bit like creating a drug. It's like creating a new drug. You don't release it until you're ready. And then when you're ready, you need the full works, you need the team, which we've got. We've got a wonderful research and ethical, clinical, scientific team all over the country as well, from Leeds, down to Cornwall. So we're ready to go.
Great.
Sorry. Question: how can LEPs help us?
Great. So yes, I guess there's kind of two things there. There's the female angle, but there's also, I suppose, the investment angle of how to get those kind of middling companies that want to scale. So let's go through. Gagan, do you want to go first, and then if Tom or Mark want to chip in as well, that'd be great.
So, Alison, your point about females and potentially a glass ceiling, I still think that's an issue. Partly that's unfortunately down to lifestyle choices like having families, things like that. And I think historically businesses would penalise you off the back of taking a career break. I think the benefit of
I worked through both my pregnancies. I didn't have maternity. I was self-employed throughout.
Congratulations. I think the point I was trying to make was that during this pandemic, the fact that everyone has been forced to work at home, and I should say, hasten to add that I'm in Westminster, so these aren't my home curtains, in case anyone was judging me. The point about working from home for the last 3-4 months has meant that actually employers can be reassured that employees, with the additional flexibility of working from home in their own hours, are still being productive. So I'm hoping there'll be an acceleration of a change of what's actually the correct type of workforce. So my own team, for instance, I've got a selection of just 5. So I've got 3 guys, 2 women, and all 5 of them are brilliant. I could not do my job as a member of Parliament without them. In terms of your own business, in terms of health and well-being, I think that's going to be really at the forefront of future investment. With more and more people working from home, not being cited, the cooler chats that you'd normally have, saying to a colleague, "Are you okay?" It's been really difficult during this pandemic. So I went to having a daily team call with my team, not so much to keep an eye on the work, but just to make sure they're okay. And I think businesses will really appreciate that, because I think they'll see, those that don't will see productivity start to dwindle quite quickly. So they'll need to be a lot more proactive.
Great. We've got a question from Matt Smith as well. So from the Centre for Entrepreneurs. So over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Philip. And I recognise we're now running out of time. Keep this brief. With the sheer amount of money being kind of allocated to LEPs, should they be subject to freedom of information requests?
We are.
Strong question.
And we respond to them regularly.
I've read through many, and I guess my challenge is that the responsible body is subject, but the organisation themselves aren't in many cases. Therefore, it's actually hard to extract necessary information from any of them.
I think you're going to have to help me offline with some case studies here, because I have been through quite a few FOI requests in my LEP. And yes, we get our accountable body involved, but we don't. I mean, Gagan wants to say something, but we don't duck FOI requests. I mean, we're meant to be transparent and accountable, and that means we should be answering the questions. So if you've had some, I mean, I can't answer for Matt for the issues that you may have had, unless there's some with me. But
no, not with you.
You wanted to add that?
The only thing I'd add to that just really quickly is, it might sound strange, but I'm the head of data at the Open Data Institute Leeds. Everyone assumes that I file FOIs. I've never done one, and we don't do FOIs. The reason for that is that I really do believe that being open with your data and open and transparent actually is the best business decision. So there have been some problems with some LEPs, as there's been problems with everything. But I think what will actually make transparency happen, in my experience, really well, is you start to get some politicians involved. They are then on the hook electorally for making sure the LEP doesn't waste money. But also the LEP will just understand that the more it's transparent and the more it shares, the more missed opportunities come back to it. And we have seen that with certainly the Leeds City Region LEP went from really quite poor at sharing, because it had never thought to do it, to being really quite good in the last few months at a lot less black marker on the minutes, let's put it that way. So there's been some real improvement I've experienced.
So if I could just build on that, from my direct experience of LEPs, I think it's worth highlighting the fact that as a politician, we are only custodians for your money as taxpayers. So the level of scrutiny and oversight is significant, and rightly so. So all the meetings I used to attend on the LEP were really long and really detailed, because as a politician, we needed to be able to justify our decision making on why we were spending that money that way.
Yeah, and I just want to make I need to make one thing clear. Actually, we're not transparent and accountable because local authority people told us to, right? Business people are used to being accountable to their shareholders. And so we don't need to be told this. So we expect to be accountable and open. I mean, there'll be some commercially sensitive stuff, and I understand the points that Tom's made, but don't get me wrong, I don't need to be told by my local authority people to share information. It's the way we do business. And I think that's fair to say for the vast majority of my colleagues as well. But I don't want anybody to leave this session thinking that it's anything other than that, because that's how we work.
Just before we end, because I know we're at the time, I wanted to come back to Alison's question about basically inclusion in entrepreneurialism. One of the best things that I've seen worked, and this could only have happened because of the more local approach, was there's two people in Leeds. One's Sarah Tulip, you can look her up, and the other is Natasha Zay-Salem. One of the interesting things is when you have women in senior positions in big companies, they have a lot of power to convene the ecosystem and the network. So there is an example there, which is a great one of something that's happened in Leeds, which has really turned not a very inclusive digital ecosystem into a quite bad inclusive digital ecosystem. Let's not pretend that we're doing brilliantly, but in terms of sharing best practice, I'm sure that that's exactly the type of thing that other LEPs would want to look at and say, look, how has this Leeds Digital Entrepreneurs Board got together? How are they promoting inclusion? Because they will tell you the same. It's pretty basic stuff. And if you just get it right, things happen, and it helps everyone. Certainly for them at Sky, they just want to hire more good people, right? They're just desperate to hire more good people. So they will do pretty much anything to make that possible.
So I think we need to wrap it up, Alison. So over to you, Katrina.
Yeah, I was just going to wrap it up there. And I thought I might just mention, just on the piece about inclusivity, the Entrepreneurs Network, which is the Secretariat for the APPG for Entrepreneurship, has a female founders forum. And if there's anyone on this call or watching the webinar later who is interested in supporting or in being supported as a female founder, it's something you might want to look into getting involved in. Thank you so much to everybody who's contributed, particularly our amazing speakers. This has been such a fascinating conversation and touched on so many different points. Thank you, Gagan. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tom.
You're welcome.
And after this call, we will we'll send around some of the links and some of the conversations that we're having in the chat. It's been mentioned there's been a really interesting side conversation going on while we've been talking. So thank you to everyone who popped your questions in there. Check out the event program on the APPG for Entrepreneurship website to come to any of our future webinars. And of course, in the not too distant future, hopefully we'll be getting back to having real world meetings, which will be extremely exciting. So if you haven't been to any of our events before, check it out and come along and get involved in building the relationships between the entrepreneurial community and Parliament, because conversations like this are so essential for shaping our ideas, shaping where the country goes and our matrix, our infrastructure. Thank you again, and see you in the future. Goodbye, everybody.